The stagecoach kicked up dust like a dying man's last breath. Caleb Vance watched it approach from the porch of his ranch house, a structure that had seen better years and better men. The wood was weathered gray, the paint long surrendered to wind that never stopped talking out here on the frontier. He stood with his arms crossed, jaw set, trying to convince himself this was practical. Just practical. A mail-order bride. The words still tasted wrong in his mouth. But the ranch needed work he couldn't do alone, and the silence in the house had started eating at him in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. So he'd written the letter, kept it simple, honest to the point of blunt. Rancher, 34, needs wife. Must be capable, quiet, uncomplicated. No romance, partnership only. The agency had written back with a candidate. Plain, they said. Sensible. Perfect. The coach rattled to a stop, and Caleb's hired hand, a gap-toothed kid named Morrison, scrambled to help with the door. What stepped out wasn't what Caleb expected. She was small. He'd give them that much. But plain? That word didn't fit right. Her dress was simple enough, dark gray wool that had seen some miles, but the way she moved had a precision to it that made him think of a knife being drawn from a sheath. Smooth, deliberate. Her hair was dark, pulled back tight, and when her eyes swept the ranch, they didn't linger on anything. They cataloged. That's what bothered him. She wasn't looking, she was assessing. Mr. Vance? Her voice carried clear across the yard, no tremor in it. That's me. He came down the steps, boots heavy on the wood. You must be Miss Quinn. Elara. She didn't offer her hand, just stood there with a single bag at her feet, waiting. Right, Elara. The name felt too soft for the woman in front of him. That all you brought? It's all I need. Morrison grabbed the bag before Caleb could, nearly stumbling under the weight of it. The kid's eyes went wide. What you got in here, lady? Rocks? Something flickered across her face, too fast to read. Books, mostly. I hope that's acceptable, Mr. Vance. Books. Heavy ones, apparently. Caleb filed that away with the other details that didn't quite line up. House is this way. The interior of the ranch house was clean but bare. Caleb kept it that way on purpose. Less to remind him. The main room held a table, 4 chairs, a stove that worked when it felt like it. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms. One was his. One had been... He cleared his throat. You'll take the room at the end of the hall. It's got a good window, catches the morning light. Elara set her bag down carefully, like it might break or explode. And the third room? Locked. The word came out harder than he meant it to. Stays that way. She didn't push. That should have been a relief, but instead it made him more uneasy. Most women would have asked, would have pried. She just nodded once and turned to survey the kitchen. You cook? He asked. Well enough. Work a ranch? I learned quickly. You always talk like you're being interviewed? That got him something, not quite a smile, but a shift at the corner of her mouth. You always ask questions you already know the answer to? Touché. He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. I've got fence line needs checking. Morrison will show you where things are. We eat at sundown, nothing fancy. Mr. Vance? He paused at the door. What are the rules? Rules? For the arrangement. What you expect. What I'm not to do. Caleb turned to face her. She stood with her hands folded in front of her, spine straight, face blank as fresh paper. But her eyes, there was something moving behind them, something she was working very hard to keep hidden. Stay out of the locked room, he said. Don't ask about my past. Do your share of the work. That's it. And if I have rules? That caught him off guard. Such as? My belongings remain mine. My bag, my books. No one touches them without permission. And I'd like a lock for my door. Morrison shifted awkwardly in the corner. Caleb could feel the kid's curiosity radiating off him like heat. You worried about something? Caleb asked. I prefer privacy. It was a reasonable request. Should have been, anyway. But the way she said it, like she was negotiating a treaty instead of household arrangements, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Fine, he said. Morrison, find a lock for Miss Quinn's door. Yes, sir. The kid couldn't get out of there fast enough. Caleb should have followed, should have gone to check that fence line like he'd said. Instead, he stood there, trying to figure out what it was about this woman that had him on edge. Something else? Elara asked. You running from something? The question hung between them like smoke. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, aren't we all? It wasn't a yes, wasn't a no. It was an answer that said more by what it didn't say, and Caleb Vance had been around long enough to know when someone was dodging. I don't need complications, he said. Neither do I. Then we understand each other. Do we? He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe this was simple, a transaction, a partnership, nothing more. But as he headed out into the wind and dust, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited something into his house that couldn't be controlled with rules and locked doors. Imbat Samit. The first week passed in careful distance. Alara learned the kitchen faster than Caleb would have thought possible. The stove that usually fought him like a temperamental horse seemed to obey her without question. She cooked simple food, beans, bread, stew that actually had flavor, and she didn't talk much while doing it. She asked about the ranch work with the same precise attention she gave everything else. How many head of cattle, where the water sources were, which pastures got rotated when. Caleb answered, watching her commit it all to memory like she was planning a campaign. Nights. She disappeared into her room. He'd hear her up there sometimes, walking. Not pacing, that would have implied nervousness. This was methodical. Every night, the same pattern, window to door to the far wall like she was measuring. Morrison noticed too. She's odd, boss, the kid said one evening while they were mending tack in the barn. Not bad odd, just, I don't know, careful. Careful's better than careless. Sure, but Morrison fumbled with the leather strap he was working. It's like she's always thinking 3 moves ahead. Makes a man wonder what game she's playing. Caleb had wondered the same thing. She'd do her work? Better than most. Fixed that gate hinge I'd been meaning to get to for a month. Didn't ask for help, didn't make a fuss, just did it. Then what's the problem? Morrison chewed his lip. No problem, I guess. Just seems like someone who knows how to fix a gate hinge probably didn't need to order herself a husband off a catalog, is all. The kid wasn't wrong. Caleb had been thinking the same thing, though he'd been trying not to. Women who became mail-order brides usually fell into a few categories: desperate, damaged, or running out of options. Alara didn't fit any of them cleanly. That night at dinner, he decided to push a little. You said you brought books, he started, passing the bread. What kind? Alara looked up from her plate. Various subjects. History, science, some literature. Heavy reading for a ranch wife. I wasn't aware there was a restriction on what ranch wives could read. There isn't, just making conversation. She set down her fork with deliberate precision. Mr. Vance, if you have questions, ask them directly. I don't have patience for fishing. All right. He leaned back in his chair. Why'd you answer my advertisement? Woman with your capabilities could have done other things. Such as? Teaching. Working in a shop. Hell, with those books. Maybe something clearer than ending up on a ranch in the middle of nowhere with a man you've never met. Those options require references, connections, histories that can be verified. She picked up her fork again. Your advertisement required none of those things. There it was. Not quite an admission, but close enough. So you're running. I'm starting over. There's a difference. Not much of one. The difference, Alara said, is in whether you're looking backward or forward. I prefer forward. Caleb studied her across the table. In the lamplight, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s maybe. Old enough to have lived some life, young enough that whatever she was running from probably still had teeth. Fair enough, he said, but if whatever's behind you shows up here, I need to know about it. It won't. You sound certain. I am. She was lying, or at least she was hoping hard enough that it looked like certainty. Caleb had done enough hoping in his own life to recognize it. They finished the meal in silence. 2 weeks in, Alara started exploring the land. Caleb watched her from a distance one morning, riding fence line on the north pasture. She'd walked out past the barn, past the equipment shed, all the way to the ridge that overlooked the valley. She stood there for a long time, perfectly still, just looking. At what, he couldn't say. There was nothing but scrub grass and rock formations out there, the occasional hawk circling, but she studied it like it was a painting in a museum. When she finally turned back, she walked a different route. Not random, he could tell that much. She was mapping, finding all the approaches to the ranch, all the sight lines, all the places someone could come from. That's when Caleb knew for certain. Alara Quinn wasn't just running from something. She was preparing for it to find her. That night, after she'd gone upstairs, he sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey he rarely touched. Morrison had headed into town for supplies, so the house was quiet, except for the wind and the creaking of old wood settling. He should send her away. That was the smart play. Whatever trouble she'd brought with her, he didn't need it. He'd built this life on keeping the world at arm's length, and letting her stay was like leaving a door open in winter. But he didn't move. Just sat there, drinking slowly, listening to her footsteps overhead, back and forth, window to door to wall, measuring, planning, preparing. The knock came 3 days later. Caleb was in the barn, replacing a rotted board, when he heard the horse. Single rider, moving at an easy pace. Not unusual. They got the occasional traveler looking for directions or a meal, but something about the timing made his gut tighten. He walked out into the yard just as Morrison was greeting the stranger. The man who dismounted was everything Caleb wasn't. Polished, well-dressed, with boots that had never seen real work. His horse was quality stock, the kind that cost more than Caleb made in a year. And his smile was the practiced kind that rich men wore when they wanted something. "Good morning," the stranger said, tipping his hat. "Beautiful spread you've got here." "It serves," Caleb said. "Something I can help you with?" "Perhaps. I'm looking for someone. A young woman, traveling alone. Dark hair, about 5'3". Might have passed through recently." The stranger pulled a photograph from his vest pocket. "Goes by the name Eleanor Ashford." Caleb's blood went cold, but he kept his face neutral. Took the photograph, looked at it. It was Alara, all right, younger, dressed in finery that probably cost more than his ranch. Standing in front of a mansion with people who looked like they owned the world. "Haven't seen her," Caleb said, handing it back. "Sorry." "You're certain?" She might have been using a different name. These young ladies sometimes do when they get foolish notions about running off. There was something in the way he said foolish notions that made Caleb want to put a fist through his teeth. "Like I said, haven't seen her." The stranger's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "That's unfortunate. You see, Miss Ashford is quite valuable to her family. They're very eager to have her returned safely, very generous to anyone who might assist in that return." "I'm sure they are. Of course, they'd be equally displeased with anyone who might hinder her return. You understand." Morrison had gone very still near the barn. Caleb could feel the tension radiating off the kid. "I understand just fine," Caleb said, "but I can't help you with someone I haven't seen. You're welcome to water your horse before you head out." The stranger studied him for a long moment. Then he glanced toward the house. Caleb's hand drifted toward his belt, where his revolver sat. "That won't be necessary," the stranger said, mounting up. "But if you should happen to see Miss Ashford, or anyone matching her description, there's a telegraph office in Red Hollow. The Ashford family would be most appreciative of any information." "I'll keep that in mind." The stranger tipped his hat again, that cold smile never shifting. Then he turned his horse and rode out, taking his time about it, like he owned the road, like he owned everything. Caleb didn't move until the dust had settled. "Boss," Morrison started. "Not now." Caleb walked into the house. Alara was at the kitchen table, a book open in front of her, but he could tell she hadn't been reading. Her hands were too still, her breathing too controlled. "Eleanor Ashford," he said. She closed the book slowly. "Who came?" "Didn't give his name. Well-dressed, expensive horse. Said your family's looking for you. Said they're very eager to have you back." "What did you tell him?" "That I hadn't seen you." Alara's eyes snapped to his face, something like shock breaking through her careful control. "Why?" Good question. Caleb wasn't entirely sure himself. Maybe it was the way the stranger had called her valuable, like she was livestock. Maybe it was the threat buried in his polite words. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Caleb Vance had spent years letting the world push him around, and he was tired of it. "Because he felt wrong," Caleb said. "And because you're here under my roof, which makes you my responsibility." That was foolish. Probably. "They won't stop looking." I figured. Elara stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. You don't understand what you've done. The Ashfords, they're not people you cross. They have resources, connections. Then you better start telling me the truth, Caleb cut in. All of it. Because if I'm going to have rich people's trouble coming down on my ranch, I need to know what I'm dealing with. She looked at him for a long moment, something complicated moving behind her eyes. Fear, maybe. Or calculation. Or both. Then she sat back down. My full name is Eleanor Ashford, she began, her voice steady despite everything. My father owns half the railroad contracts west of the Mississippi. My mother's family has holdings in mining, timber, shipping. I was raised to be, useful. A tool to broker deals, secure alliances, expand the empire. Sounds rough, Caleb said, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. You think poverty is the only cage? Eleanor, whatever her name was, met his eyes. They had my entire life planned. Who I'd marry, where I'd live, what children I'd produce to continue their legacy. I was an asset to be managed, Mr. Vance, not a person. So you ran. So I ran. She folded her hands on the table. I took what I could carry, bought passage under a false name, and found your advertisement in a newspaper in a town I'd never heard of. I thought distance and obscurity would be enough. I was wrong. The man who was here, who is he? Thomas Garrett, head of my father's security. He's persistent. He threatened me. Politely, but he threatened me. He would do worse than threaten if he knew I was here. Eleanor's jaw tightened. The Ashfords don't accept defiance. They especially don't accept it from their own family. Caleb walked to the window, looking out at the ranch. His ranch. The life he'd built from nothing, trying to outrun his own ghosts. Now here was a woman with ghosts of her own, and he'd just painted a target on both their backs by lying to a man who looked like he enjoyed hurting people. You should have told me, he said. Would you have taken me if I had? No? Then I made the right choice. He turned to face her. This changes things. I know. If they come back, they will. Then we need a plan. Eleanor blinked. We? You're my wife. On paper, anyway. The words felt strange, but true in a way Caleb hadn't expected. That might not mean much where you come from, but out here it means something. You're under my protection now. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Why would you do this? Caleb had been asking himself the same thing. The smart answer was he wouldn't. The safe answer was to put her on the next stage out and wash his hands of the whole mess. But as he looked at Eleanor Ashford Quinn, this woman who'd walked away from wealth and power because she'd rather face an uncertain future than live as someone else's property, he realized something that should have terrified him but didn't. He recognized her. Not her face or her past, but the core of what drove her. The same thing that had driven him to this isolated ranch, to these locked rooms and careful silences. The need to be something other than what the world said you had to be. Because, he said finally, everyone deserves the right to choose their own life, even if it's a hard one. Eleanor stood up slowly. She crossed the room until she was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the weight she'd been carrying alone. Thank you, she said. It wasn't enough. The words couldn't carry what they needed to carry, but Caleb nodded anyway, accepting them. We should eat, he said, because he didn't know what else to say. Then we figure out what comes next. Outside, the wind picked up. In the distance, Morrison was singing off-key while working on the corral. The ranch looked the same as it had an hour ago, but everything had shifted in ways Caleb couldn't quite name yet. He'd come out here to escape complications, to live simply, quietly, without the mess of other people's lives tangling with his own. But as Eleanor moved to the stove, her shoulders a little less rigid than before, Caleb thought maybe some complications were worth having, even if they came with expensive horses and men who smiled while threatening you, even if they came with locked rooms and heavy bags full of books that were probably more than books, even if they came with a past that wouldn't stay buried and a future that looked increasingly uncertain. He'd made his choice when he lied to Thomas Garrett. Now he'd have to live with it. Turned out Caleb Vance wasn't as good at running from things as he'd thought. And maybe, just maybe, that was all right. The next morning came with frost on the windows and a silence that felt heavier than usual. Caleb woke before dawn, same as always, but lay there longer than he normally would, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere down the hall, Eleanor was probably doing the same thing, lying awake, calculating her next move. He'd protected her, lied for her, put himself between her and people who had the kind of money that made problems disappear. The smart part of his brain was screaming that he'd made a mistake. The rest of him didn't care. By the time he made it downstairs, she was already in the kitchen. Coffee was brewing, and she'd laid out bread and preserves on the table. She looked up when he entered, and something passed between them that hadn't been there before. Not trust, exactly. More like acknowledgement. "We need to talk strategy," she said without preamble. Caleb poured himself coffee, black and strong enough to strip paint. "I'm listening." "Garrett will report back to my father. They'll assume I kept moving, but they won't stop looking. Red Hollow is small enough that questions will be asked. If anyone mentions a new woman at the Vance Ranch, then they'll come back." Caleb sat down across from her. "So we give them a reason not to question it." "What kind of reason?" "The legal kind. We make this marriage real. On paper, properly filed. Eleanor Ashford disappears completely. You become Alara Vance, ranch wife. Nothing unusual about that." Eleanor's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "You do that? Actually marry me?" "It's already what we told people. Might as well make it official." He met her eyes. "Unless you've got a better idea." "I don't." She set the cup down carefully. "But you understand what you're offering. If they find out, if they connect us, then we deal with it together." The words came out easier than he expected. "I'm not saying this is permanent. When things settle, when it's safe, you can go wherever you want. But right now, the best protection you've got is being somebody else entirely." She studied him for a long moment, that sharp intelligence working behind her eyes. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Vance. Probably both. You in or not?" Eleanor took a breath, then nodded once. "I'm in." "Good. There's a circuit judge comes through Red Hollow once a month, due in 3 days. We'll make it legal then." Caleb stood, draining his coffee. "In the meantime, we need to make sure our story's airtight. How long you been here?" 2 weeks? Near enough." "Right. So we tell people we met through the mail, you came out, things worked faster than expected. Simple, clean. And if someone asks why the rush?" Caleb paused at the door, glancing back at her. "We tell them the truth. We're practical people who don't see the point in waiting. Out here, that's normal enough." He headed out to start the day's work, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts. The sun was just breaking over the ridge, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It should have been peaceful. Instead, Caleb felt like he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't see the bottom of. Morrison was already up, mucking out the stalls with the resigned expression of someone who'd drawn the short straw. "Boss," he said, pausing mid-shovel, "that fella yesterday. Taken care of." "That mean what I think it means?" Caleb grabbed a pitchfork and joined him. "Means Miss Quinn's staying. Means we're getting married legal in 3 days. Means if anyone asks, she's been here 2 weeks and everything's normal." Morrison let out a low whistle. "You sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of it familiar and grounding. Finally, Morrison spoke up again. "She seems like good people, scared, but good." "Yeah. Those men looking for her, they seem like bad people." "Yeah. So I guess you made the right choice." Morrison grinned, gap-toothed and genuine. "Even if it's going to make your life a whole lot more complicated." Caleb couldn't argue with that. The day passed in hard work and careful planning. Eleanor, Alara, he needed to start thinking of her that way, threw herself into ranch tasks with an intensity that surprised him. She helped Morrison repair the chicken coop, learned to milk the cow without complaint, and spent an hour studying the account books like they were scripture. "Your numbers are wrong," she said that evening, pointing to a column of figures. Caleb leaned over her shoulder. "What do you mean wrong? You're undercharging for the cattle. Market rate's at least 15% higher than what you're getting. And these feed costs you're buying from Miller's store? It's closest. It's also overpriced. There's a supplier 2 towns over that sells in bulk for half this." She tapped the page. "You're leaving money on the table, Mr. Vance?" He wanted to be annoyed. Instead, he found himself impressed. "You know business. I was raised in it. whether I wanted to be or not. She closed the book. I can help with this if you'll let me. I'm good with numbers. Have at it. I'm better with cattle than ledgers anyway. Something almost like a smile crossed her face. I'd gathered. That night, after dinner, Caleb found himself telling her things he hadn't planned to. About the ranch, about how he'd built it from nothing after. He stopped himself before saying too much. But Alara noticed. Of course she did. The locked room, she said quietly. Someone died. It wasn't a question. Caleb stared into his coffee, jaw tight. Yeah. I'm sorry. Don't be. Was a long time ago. Time doesn't make it hurt less, just makes it hurt different. He looked up at her then, really looked. She was holding her own cup like it might shatter, her expression carefully neutral. But he could see it now. The grief she carried, different from his but just as heavy. Who'd you lose? He asked. Myself, mostly. She set the cup down. The person I might have been, if I'd been born somewhere else. To someone else. That why you ran? To find her? I don't know if she exists, but I had to try. They sat there in the lamplight, two people carrying their own private wreckage, and for the first time since Sarah died, Caleb didn't feel completely alone in the world. The next 2 days were a study in controlled chaos. Morrison rode into Red Hollow with instructions to spread the word, subtle-like, that Caleb Vance was getting married. The town's response ranged from surprise to congratulations to barely concealed gossip. By the time the circuit judge arrived, half the frontier probably knew, which was exactly what they needed. Alara spent the time transforming herself into someone who belonged. She let her hair down, softened her edges just enough to seem approachable. She practiced her smile in the mirror. Caleb caught her doing it once and pretended he hadn't. She was learning to play a part, and she was good at it. Too good, maybe. The morning of the wedding, such as it was, Caleb put on his cleanest shirt and tried not to think too hard about what he was doing. It wasn't real, not really. Just legal protection. A piece of paper. But when Alara came downstairs in a simple dress the color of cream, her hair braided and pinned up, something in his chest tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. You clean up nice, he said, because he didn't know what else to say. So do you. Morrison drove them into Red Hollow in the wagon, whistling cheerfully the whole way. The kid was enjoying this far too much. The judge was a tired-looking man named Hendricks, who'd seen enough frontier marriages not to ask too many questions. He ran through the ceremony with the enthusiasm of someone reading a shopping list, and when it came time for the vows, Caleb's throat went dry. Do you, Caleb Vance, take this woman? I do. And do you, Alara Quinn, take this man? I do. Her voice was steady, but he felt her hand tremble in his. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. Sign here. They signed. Morrison signed as witness. Judge Hendricks stamped it official and handed over the certificate like he was passing out receipts. Congratulations, he said, already packing up his papers. Next. And just like that, Caleb Vance was married. They were quiet on the ride back. Morrison had enough sense to keep his whistling to himself this time. The sun was high and hot, and dust devils danced across the road. That's it then, Alara said finally. That's it. I'm legally your wife. Looks that way. She turned to look at him, something unreadable in her expression. Thank you. I know this isn't what you wanted when you placed that advertisement. Life rarely gives you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you need instead. He surprised himself with the honesty of it. And you think you need me? Caleb considered the question. 2 weeks ago, he would have said no without hesitation. Now, with her sitting beside him wearing a ring he'd bought from the general store, with her name legally tied to his, he wasn't so sure. I think we'll find out, he said. Morrison pulled the wagon up to the ranch house just as the afternoon shadows were starting to lengthen. I'll put the horses up, boss. You two go on inside. Caleb helped Alara down, his wife, his actual legal wife, and they stood there for a moment in the yard, not quite sure what to do next. I should start dinner, she said. I should check the... They both stopped, the awkwardness thick enough to cut. This is strange, Alara admitted. Yeah. We should probably get used to it. Probably. But neither of them moved. It was Alara who broke first, a small laugh escaping before she could stop it. We're married and we're standing in the yard like strangers. Well, we kind of are. But Caleb found himself smiling too. Strangers who happened to have a legal document saying otherwise. The most romantic story ever told. I'll write a book about it. This time she really laughed, and the sound did something to ease the tension. They went inside together, and if it felt different now, more real somehow, neither of them said it out loud. Dinner that night was quiet but not uncomfortable. Morrison ate with them, chattering about town gossip like nothing had changed. The Hendersons' daughter was engaged. The saloon had gotten a new piano. Someone's cow had gotten loose and ended up in the church. Normal things. Regular things. The kind of things that made the day feel less like a turning point and more like just another Wednesday. After Morrison headed to the bunkhouse, Caleb and Alara sat at the table with the lamp burning low between them. "I've been thinking about Garrett," she said. "And? He'll report back that he didn't find me. But my father won't accept that as final. He'll send someone else. Or Garrett will come back, or—" She stopped, frustration clear on her face. "I keep running through scenarios and none of them end cleanly. Maybe that's because you're trying to plan for something you can't control." "Control is all I have." "No, it's not." Caleb leaned forward. "You've got legal protection now. You've got a life here that checks out. And you've got, He stopped himself before saying, "me." But she heard it anyway. "You," she finished softly. "I've got you." "For what it's worth?" "It's worth more than you know." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Alara stood, gathering the dishes. "I should clean up." "I'll help." They worked side by side in companionable silence, washing and drying, putting things away. It was domestic in a way Caleb hadn't experienced since before Sarah died, and he found he didn't hate it as much as he thought he would. "Caleb," Alara said as they finished. It was the first time she'd used his first name. "Yeah?" "The locked room. I won't ask about it, but if you ever want to tell me, I'll listen." He looked at her, really looked. At this woman who'd walked into his life 2 weeks ago and turned everything sideways, who'd trusted him with her secrets even though she'd had no reason to, who was standing in his kitchen wearing a wedding ring and offering to carry some of his weight. "Maybe someday," he said. "Okay." She went upstairs and Caleb sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after, listening to her footsteps overhead, back and forth, window to door to wall. But tonight, the pattern stopped earlier than usual, and he could have sworn he heard her pause outside the locked room, just for a moment, before continuing to her own. The days that followed settled into something that almost resembled normal. Alara threw herself into the ranch work with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She learned to ride, not gracefully, but competently. She learned which cattle were troublemakers and which were docile. She learned to read the weather and the clouds and the behavior of the animals. And she learned about Caleb, piece by careful piece. He didn't talk much, but she was good at reading what he didn't say. The way he checked the locked room's door every morning, just to make sure. The way he went quiet when Morrison mentioned families. The way he worked himself to exhaustion some days, like he was trying to outrun something that lived in his own head. She didn't push, just watched and waited and slowly pieced together the shape of his grief. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived. Morrison brought it up from town, and Alara's face went white when she saw the seal. "It's from my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb took the letter from her shaking hands. "You want me to open it?" She nodded, unable to speak. The letter was short, written in the kind of handwriting that came from expensive education and unlimited confidence. "Eleanor, I know you believe you've escaped. You haven't. Whatever game you're playing, whatever life you think you're building, understand that it exists only because I haven't yet decided to end it. You will return, if not willingly, then otherwise. Think carefully about who you're dragging into this foolishness." Your father Caleb read it twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Then he walked to the stove and held the letter to the flame until it caught. They both watched it burn. "He knows," Alara said. "He knows I'm here. Maybe. Or he's fishing." Caleb tossed the burning paper into the stove. "Either way, a letter's just words. He wants you scared." "I am scared." "I know, but you're also safe. You're Alara Vance now, legally and publicly. He can't just take you." You don't know my father. He doesn't ask, he takes. Caleb turned to face her, and there was something hard in his expression that she hadn't seen before. Then he's going to find out what happens when he tries to take something from me. The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her. Instead, it made her feel something she hadn't felt in months, protected. This isn't your fight, she said, but without conviction. It became my fight the moment I lied to Garrett. We're past the point of backing out now. He crossed his arms. Question is, what do we do about it? What can we do? We make ourselves a harder target. We dig in. We make it clear to anyone watching that you're not going anywhere, and neither am I. How? Caleb thought for a moment, then said, we make this place yours, not just legally, actually yours. You start making decisions about the ranch. We let people in town see us together, see that this is real. We build a life here that's too solid to just erase. You're talking about actually being married. I'm talking about making it convincing enough that your father thinks twice before making a move. Elara walked to the window, looking out at the land. The ranch stretched out before her, rough and unforgiving, but somehow beautiful in its honesty. So different from the manicured estates she'd grown up on, where everything was controlled and nothing was real. I don't know how to do that, she admitted. I don't know how to be normal, to have a life that isn't just survival. Neither do I. Caleb came to stand beside her. But we can figure it out together. She turned to look at him, this man who'd become her husband, through a combination of necessity and something else she couldn't quite name. Why are you doing this, really? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because I'm tired of running from things, and because you deserve better than to spend your life looking over your shoulder. So do you. Maybe we both do. It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even particularly romantic, but standing there in the afternoon light, looking at each other with clear eyes and no illusions, it felt like something more solid than romance. It felt like choice. Okay, Elara said. We dig in. We build a life. We make it real. Okay. But Caleb, if this goes wrong, if they come for me and you get hurt, then we deal with it. He cut her off gently. Together. That's what this means now. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, that he didn't understand what he was up against. But when she looked at his face, she saw that he did understand. He just didn't care. Caleb Vance had chosen his side, and he wasn't the kind of man who chose lightly. That night, Elara did something she hadn't done since arriving at the ranch. She took out the lockbox she kept hidden in her wardrobe and opened it. Inside were the things she'd taken when she fled. Jewelry she could sell if needed, documents that proved who she really was, and a small pistol her mother had given her years ago. She took out the gun, checked it was loaded, and placed it in the drawer of her nightstand. If they came for her, she wouldn't go quietly. And she wouldn't let them hurt the man who'd been stupid enough to protect her. Downstairs, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with his own pistol, cleaning it methodically. He'd lived peacefully for years, avoiding trouble, keeping his head down. That peace was probably over now. Strange thing was, he didn't regret it. The next morning, they rode into Red Hollow together. It was market day, and the town was busy with ranchers and farmers conducting business. Caleb and Elara walked down the main street side by side, and if people noticed, and they did, that was the point. They bought supplies at the general store. Elara chatted with Mrs. Henderson about preserves and garden plants. Caleb discussed cattle prices with the other ranchers. They looked, for all the world, like a normal married couple going about normal business. And if Elara's eyes occasionally scanned the crowd, looking for expensive suits and dangerous smiles, well, that was subtle enough that most people didn't notice. Morrison, watching from across the street, grinned to himself. The boss was playing it smart, making a show of things, making sure everyone knew Elara Vance was part of the community now. What Morrison didn't see was the man in the shadows at the edge of town, watching through a spyglass and taking notes. What he didn't know was that Thomas Garrett had never really left. 2 days later, the trouble started in earnest. It began small, a fence cut during the night, letting half their cattle wander. Nothing catastrophic, but inconvenient. Caleb repaired it and said nothing. Then the feed delivery was wrong, spoiled grain that couldn't be used. The supplier swore he'd sent fresh stock. Someone had switched it between there and the ranch. Then Morrison's horse came up lame under suspicious circumstances. Then a fire started in the barn, small, quickly contained but clearly set on purpose. Caleb found the remains of the match and kerosene and knew exactly what was happening. They were being pressured, worn down, made to understand that protecting Alara came with a cost. He gathered Morrison and Alara in the kitchen that night and laid out the evidence. "This is a message," he said. "Whoever's behind it wants us to know they can get to us whenever they want." "It's my father," Alara said, her voice hollow. "This is how he operates. He makes life difficult until you give him what he wants." "Well, he can make it as difficult as he likes. I'm not giving him anything." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, I'm with you, but this is getting dangerous. Maybe we should—" "Should what? Give up? Send her away?" Caleb's voice was sharp. "You want to work somewhere else, Morrison. I won't hold it against you. But I'm staying, and so is she." The kid looked between them, then straightened his shoulders. "I'm staying too. Just wanted to make sure you knew what we're up against." "I know exactly what we're up against." Caleb turned to Alara. "And I'm guessing you do too." She nodded slowly. "My father won't stop until he wins, or until the cost becomes too high. He's testing you, seeing how much pressure you can take. Then we show him we can take a lot." "Caleb, people could get hurt." "People are already getting hurt. Difference is, now we fight back." Morrison perked up. "How?" Caleb thought for a moment, then smiled grimly. "We make it expensive for them. Every cut fence, we reinforce it stronger. Every problem they cause, we solve it better than before. We don't just survive their attacks, we use them to improve. Make them realize that harassing us is accomplishing the opposite of what they want." "And if they escalate?" Alara asked quietly. "Then so do we." It was a declaration of war, and they all knew it. But as Caleb looked at his wife, and she was his wife now, in ways that went beyond paper, he saw the fear in her eyes start to harden into something else. Determination. She'd spent her whole life being pushed around by powerful men who thought they owned her. Maybe it was time to push back. "I want to learn to shoot," she said suddenly. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You know how already. I've seen the pistol in your nightstand." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know the basics. I want to know more. If we're doing this, really doing this, I need to be able to protect myself." "All right, tomorrow morning I'll teach you." Morrison grinned. "This is going to be interesting." That night, lying in her bed and staring at the ceiling, Alara made a decision. She was done running, done hiding, done letting her father's shadow dictate her life. If he wanted her back, he'd have to go through Caleb Vance, and something told her that was going to be considerably harder than dear old Dad expected. For the first time since she'd fled her family's estate, Alara Quinn Vance fell asleep without checking the locks twice. And down the hall, Caleb did the same. The morning came cold and clear, the kind of dawn that made everything sharp-edged and unforgiving. Caleb was already up, setting up targets at the far end of the property when Alara emerged from the house. She'd dressed practically, men's trousers she'd borrowed from Morrison, boots, her hair tied back tight. The pistol from her nightstand was tucked into her belt. "You ready for this?" Caleb called out. "As I'll ever be." He walked her through the basics first, even though she protested she already knew them. Stance, grip, breathing, the mechanics of the weapon itself. "You said you know the basics," he said, checking her form. "Show me." Alara raised the pistol, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt 3 feet left of the target. "Basics, huh?" Caleb tried not to smile. "I said I knew them. I didn't say I was good at them." She lowered the gun, frustrated. "My mother gave me this when I turned 16. Told me every woman should know how to protect herself. I fired it maybe twice." "At least you're honest." He moved behind her, adjusting her stance. "You're tensing up before you shoot. That's why you're pulling left. Relax your shoulders. The gun's going to kick. Let it. Don't fight it." She tried again. This time the shot was closer, though still wide. "Better," Caleb said. "Again." They spent the next hour working through it. Alara was a quick study when she wasn't in her own head, and by the time the sun was fully up, she was hitting the target more often than not. "Not bad," Caleb said, reloading for her. "You keep practicing, you'll be dangerous." "That's the idea." Morrison wandered over, drawn by the gunfire. "She got a good teacher," he said, grinning at Caleb. "She's got determination. That counts for more. Elara wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold. How'd you learn? To shoot like that? The question hung in the air for a moment. Caleb's jaw tightened, and Morrison suddenly found something very interesting to look at in the distance. The war, Caleb said finally, taught me a lot of things I wish I didn't know. You don't talk about it. Not much to say. I went. I came back. A lot of men didn't. He handed her the reloaded pistol. Again, this time, don't think so much. Just shoot. She did. The bullet punched clean through the center of the target. Elara stared at it, surprised. I did that? You did that. Caleb allowed himself a small smile. Turns out you're a natural when you get out of your own way. Something passed between them then, a moment of shared accomplishment that felt almost normal, like they were just a husband teaching his wife to shoot, nothing complicated about it. The moment shattered when Morrison pointed toward the ridge. Boss, riders. 3 of them, moving slow and deliberate. Not locals. Caleb could tell that from how they sat their horses. Too formal. Too clean. Inside, he said quietly, both of you. Caleb, now Elara. She must have heard something in his voice because she didn't argue, just grabbed her pistol and headed for the house with Morrison. Caleb waited in the yard, hand resting easy on his own gun, watching the riders approach. They stopped 20 feet out. The man in the middle was Garrett. No surprise there. The 2 flanking him were new, hard-faced men with the kind of eyes that had seen violence and hadn't minded it much. Mr. Vance, Garrett said pleasantly. Good morning. Garrett, I see you've been busy. Target practice, was it? My wife likes to learn new things. Ah, yes. Your wife. Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Elara Vance, née Quinn. Quite the whirlwind romance, I understand. 2 weeks from introduction to marriage. Very efficient. We're practical people. Indeed. Garrett glanced toward the house. I wonder if I might have a word with Mrs. Vance, just a friendly conversation. She's busy. I'm sure she could spare a moment. I'm sure she couldn't. Caleb's voice went flat. You've got business here. State it. Otherwise, you're trespassing. One of the other men shifted in his saddle, hand moving toward his coat. Caleb's own hand tightened on his gun, not drawing, just ready. Garrett raised a hand, stopping his man. No need for unpleasantness. I simply wanted to extend an offer. Mr. Ashford is a reasonable man. He understands that young ladies sometimes make impulsive decisions. He's willing to overlook this entire episode if Eleanor returns home voluntarily. Her name is Elara, and she is home. Mr. Vance, please understand the situation. You're a small rancher in the middle of nowhere. The Ashford family has resources you can't imagine. Legal resources, political resources, resources of a more direct nature. His smile turned cold. Your recent difficulties, the fence, the feed, the fire, those were just gentle reminders. They can become much less gentle. Threats now? Observations. You seem like an intelligent man. Surely you recognize when you're overmatched. Caleb thought about the war, about watching friends die in mud and blood while men in clean uniforms gave orders from miles away, about coming home to find everything he'd loved turned to ash, about spending years rebuilding himself into someone who could function, who could maybe even live again. I've been overmatched before, he said, still here. Garrett's expression hardened. Your stubbornness is admirable but misguided. Eleanor belongs with her family. Elara belongs with her husband. That's the law. Laws can be changed. Marriages can be annulled. Accidents can happen. Is that what happened to your face? The question came from the house. Elara stood on the porch, pistol held low but visible. Because you look like someone who's had a few accidents. Morrison appeared beside her, rifle in hand. The kid was shaking slightly, but his aim was steady enough. Garrett's smile vanished completely. Eleanor, how disappointing to see you playing at being a common ranch wife. It's Elara, and I'm not playing at anything. Your father is worried about you. My father is worried about losing control of me. There's a difference. He wants you to come home. This is my home now. Garrett shook his head slowly. You think marrying some dirt farmer protects you? You think a piece of paper changes anything? I think it changes everything. Elara's voice was steady. I'm a married woman now, legal and binding.
Whatever claim my father thinks he had on me ended the moment I signed that certificate. Your father doesn't recognize— I don't care what my father recognizes. The law recognizes it. And unless you've got a court order saying otherwise, you need to leave. Now.
The three men sat their horses, tension thick enough to choke on. Caleb could feel Morrison's nervousness radiating from the porch, could feel Alara's determination like heat, could feel his own heartbeat, steady and slow, the way it used to get before battle. Finally, Garrett smiled again, thin and dangerous. Very well. We'll leave. For now. But Alara, this isn't over. Your father is a patient man, but his patience has limits, and when those limits are reached— He let the threat hang unfinished. Then he tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode off with his men flanking him. Nobody moved until they disappeared over the ridge. Well, Morrison said, voice shaking, that was terrifying. Yeah. Caleb turned to look at Alara. She was still holding the pistol, knuckles white. You okay? I don't know. She lowered the gun carefully. I keep thinking I should feel something. Fear, maybe. Or regret. But all I feel is angry. Anger's useful, keeps you sharp. Is that what you felt during the war? Caleb climbed the porch steps, suddenly tired. Mostly I felt cold. Angry came later. They went inside and Morrison made coffee with hands that had finally stopped shaking. They sat around the table, none of them quite ready to acknowledge what had just happened. They're not going to stop, Alara said finally. No. And it's going to get worse. Probably. You could still send me away. I could— Stop. Caleb cut her off. We've had this conversation. I'm not sending you anywhere. But if something happens to you because of me, then something happens. Life's full of risks. He met her eyes. I'm not doing this out of obligation, Alara. I'm doing it because I choose to. You understand the difference? She studied him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. I'm starting to. Morrison cleared his throat. So what's the plan? We can't just sit here waiting for them to make the next move. No, we can't. Caleb leaned back in his chair. We go on the offensive. Make it clear we're not backing down. Alara, how much do you know about your father's business dealings? Enough. Why? Because men like him, they've always got something they'd rather keep quiet. Deals that don't quite smell right. Partners they'd prefer stayed hidden. He tapped the table. We find that something. We make it clear that if he keeps pushing, we push back in ways that hurt him where he lives. Alara's eyes widened. You're talking about blackmail. I'm talking about leverage. It's the same thing. Maybe. You got a better idea? She didn't. And the fact that she was actually considering it told Caleb just how desperate their situation had become. I'd need to get messages to people I knew, she said slowly. People who might talk if they thought they were helping me. But that means revealing where I am. Only to people you trust. I trusted my family once. Look how that turned out. Fair point. Caleb thought for a moment. What about servants? People who worked in your father's house. They see things, hear things. Maybe. There was a woman, Martha, who helped raise me. She never approved of how my father conducted business. Alara's expression turned calculating. If I could get word to her, then we find a way to get word to her. Carefully. Morrison was looking between them like they'd both lost their minds. You two realize you're talking about going after one of the most powerful men west of the Mississippi, right? Yep, Caleb said. And you think that's a good idea? Nope. But it's the only idea we've got that isn't just sitting here waiting to get picked off. The kid shook his head. You're both crazy. Probably, Alara agreed. But we're married now. Crazy kind of comes with the territory. Despite everything, Caleb found himself smiling. They spent the rest of the day planning. Alara wrote a letter to Martha, coded, careful, nothing that could be used against them if it was intercepted. Morrison would take it to Red Hollow, send it through a series of contacts to make it harder to trace. This could take weeks, Morrison said, tucking the letter into his coat. Maybe months. Then we wait, Caleb said, and we keep our eyes open. After Morrison left, Caleb and Alara stood in the kitchen, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold. I'm sorry, she said quietly. For what? For bringing this into your life. You were peaceful here, safe, and I've turned it into something worth fighting for. He surprised himself with the words. I was peaceful, yeah, but I was also half dead, going through motions. All of this, it's made me feel alive again, even if it's terrifying. Alara looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. You're a strange man, Caleb Vance. Takes one to know one, Alara Vance. The sound of her married name seemed to settle something between them. She wasn't Eleanor Ashford anymore, running and hiding. She was Alara Vance, standing her ground. I should start dinner, she said. I should check the livestock. But neither of them moved. They just stood there, close enough to touch, both of them aware of how much had changed in such a short time. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on this. On me. He wanted to say something profound, something that would make sense of what he was feeling. Instead, all that came out was, You're welcome. It was enough. That night, after dinner and chores and the careful locking of doors, Caleb found himself standing outside the locked room for the first time in months. He could hear Alara moving around upstairs, getting ready for bed. Could hear the wind picking up outside, promising a storm. Could hear his own heartbeat, loud in the silence. He put his hand on the door. The wood was cold under his palm. Sarah had died in there. Childbirth gone wrong. The baby, too. He'd locked it up the day after the funeral and hadn't opened it since. Too painful. Too raw. Easier to pretend it didn't exist than to face what it represented. But standing there now, with everything else in his life turned upside down, Caleb realized something. He'd been locked in that room just as surely as the memories inside it, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to open the door. Not tonight. He wasn't ready for that yet. But soon. He went to bed with that thought sitting heavy in his chest, and for the first time in years, he didn't dream about the war, or Sarah's screams, or the tiny coffin they'd buried next to hers. He dreamed about a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, standing on a ridge with a pistol in her hand, daring the world to come for her. The next few weeks were tense but quiet. No more sabotage. No more visits from Garrett. Just the normal rhythm of ranch life, with an undercurrent of waiting. Alara threw herself into making the ranch better. She reorganized the supply system, cutting costs and improving efficiency. She started a vegetable garden that Morrison said wouldn't survive the first frost. She proved him wrong. She also kept practicing with the pistol. Every morning, an hour after dawn, Caleb would hear the shots and know she was out there getting better. Sometimes he'd join her. They'd shoot side by side, not talking much, just being. It was the most peaceful part of his day. You're getting good, he said one morning, watching her punch holes in the center of the target with increasing regularity. I had a good teacher. You had determination. I just pointed you in the right direction. She lowered the gun, turning to look at him. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Poor choice of words, given the circumstances. But she smiled. The locked room. You check it every day. You notice that, huh? I notice everything. She paused. You don't have to tell me. But I keep thinking about what you said. About being half dead. And I wonder if maybe opening that door might help. Caleb reloaded his pistol, not meeting her eyes. You sound like you know something about locked doors. I lived in a mansion full of them, rooms I wasn't allowed in, conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. My whole life was locked doors and secrets. She set her pistol down carefully. It took leaving everything to realize the biggest lock was the one I'd put on myself, the one that said I couldn't choose my own life. And now I'm here, with you, fighting people who want to put me back in that cage. She touched his arm, gentle. I'm just saying, sometimes the things we lock away don't get better. They just get stronger. He knew she was right. Had known it for a long time, if he was honest with himself, but knowing and doing were different things. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. They went back to shooting, and if Caleb's aim was a little off for the rest of the session, Alara was kind enough not to mention it. The letter from Martha came 6 weeks after they'd sent theirs. Morrison brought it up from town, looking worried. There was a man asking about you two, he said, handing the envelope to Alara. Didn't give a name. Just wanted to know if Caleb Vance's wife was settling in all right. What'd you tell him? Caleb asked. That she was.
That you two were happy as clams and he should mind his own business. Morrison shifted. He didn't like that much, but he didn't push it either. Alara opened the letter with shaking hands. Read it once, then again, her expression hardening. What is it? Caleb asked. Martha says my father's been making inquiries, quietly, through lawyers, trying to find grounds to have our marriage annulled. On what basis?
Fraud, coercion, mental incompetence. Apparently I wasn't in my right mind when I married you. Her laugh was bitter. He's trying every angle he can think of. Will any of them work? Not if we can prove the marriage is legitimate, real. She looked up at him. Martha says we need to make it impossible to argue that this is just a legal arrangement. We need to look like an actual married couple. We are an actual married couple, on paper, but we live like, she gestured vaguely, like business partners. Separate rooms, careful distance. If someone investigates, that's what they'll see. Caleb understood what she was suggesting. You want to make it look real. I want to make it real. At least enough that no one can argue otherwise. What's that mean exactly? Alara's cheeks colored slightly. It means we need to look like we care about each other. Act like we share a life, not just a house. Maybe, she took a breath. Maybe we don't need separate rooms anymore. The suggestion hung between them, heavy with implications. You sure about that? Caleb asked carefully. No, but I don't see another option. If my father can prove this marriage is a sham, everything we've done means nothing. She wasn't wrong, and the truth was, the distance between them had been getting harder to maintain anyway. They'd built something here, maybe not romance, but partnership, trust, something that felt worth protecting. All right, Caleb said. We make it real. What else did Martha say? Alara scanned the letter again. She found something, documents. Evidence that my father's been involved in some questionable land deals, bribing officials, falsifying surveys, that sort of thing. Nothing proven, but enough to make him look bad if it got out. That's the leverage we need. Maybe, but Martha says getting the documents out won't be easy. They're in my father's private office, heavily guarded. So we need someone on the inside who can get them. We need Martha to risk everything. Alara's voice dropped. I can't ask her to do that. Did she offer? Yes. Then let her make her own choice, same as you did. Alara stared at the letter for a long time. Then she went to the desk, pulled out paper, and started writing. Caleb left her to it, heading outside to think. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch looked beautiful in that light, rough and real and honest. He'd built this place as a refuge, a place to hide from everything that hurt, but it had become something else now. A place worth defending, a life worth fighting for. And somewhere along the way, Alara had become part of that. Not because she had to be. Not because of legal documents or convenience. Because he wanted her to be. That night, they ate dinner in near silence, both of them aware that something had shifted, but neither quite ready to name it. After Morrison headed to the bunkhouse, Alara stood up, gathering dishes. I'll move my things tomorrow, she said quietly. Into your room. If that's still... It's still okay. Caleb's voice came out rougher than intended. I'll clear some space. You don't have to. I want to. She looked at him then, really looked, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with strategy or survival. Okay, she said. Okay. They cleaned up together, moving around each other with the ease of practice. When it was done, they stood in the kitchen, neither quite ready to go upstairs. This is strange, Alara said finally. Yeah. We're married, but we've been living like strangers. Yeah. And now we're going to... She trailed off. Share a room, that's all. Nothing more unless you want there to be. Relief flickered across her face. Thank you for not expecting... I know what it's like to have your life controlled by someone else. I'm not going to do that to you. Even though I'm your wife? Especially because you're my wife. He met her eyes. This only works if we both choose it. Every day. No obligations, no expectations, just choice. Alara's eyes got bright, and for a moment Caleb thought she might cry. Instead, she stepped forward and hugged him, quick and fierce and unexpected. He froze for a second, then carefully put his arms around her. She was smaller than she seemed, all sharp edges and held breath, like she was afraid to take up too much space. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for seeing me as a person, not a possession." "Same to you." They stood there for a moment longer, then pulled apart, both of them a little embarrassed. "I should—" Alara gestured toward the stairs. "Yeah, me too." They went to their separate rooms for the last time, and if both of them lay awake thinking about what came next, well, that was their own business. The morning Martha's package arrived, it was raining. Not the gentle kind, the harsh driving rain that turned roads to mud and made everything miserable. Morrison brought the package in, soaked through and cursing. "This came to the post office," he said, dropping it on the table with a wet thump. "Addressed to Alara Vance." Alara's hand shook as she opened it. Inside were documents, land deeds, contracts, correspondence, all of it pointing to a pattern of corruption that would ruin her father if it came to light. And a note from Martha. "This is all I could get. Be careful. He knows someone's digging." "She risked everything for this," Alara said, spreading the papers out. Caleb studied them, his mind working. "This is good. This is really good. But we need to use it carefully. If we just release it, your father will know it came from inside his organization. What do you suggest?" "We make a deal, direct. We tell him we have this information and we'll keep it quiet if he leaves you alone, permanently. He'll never agree to that. Then we make it public and deal with the consequences. But at least we give him the option to walk away." Alara looked at the documents, then at Caleb. "You realize this makes you an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the country? I've had worse enemies." "Have you?" He thought about the war, about officers who'd sent men to die for their own glory, about coming home to find the world changed and uncaring. "Yeah, I have." She nodded slowly. "All right. We send him a message, but we do it smart, through lawyers, official. So there's a record if anything happens to us." Agreed. They spent the rest of the day drafting the message, making sure every word was precise. By evening, they had something that would either free Alara forever or bring the full weight of the Ashford family down on their heads. Morrison would take it to Red Hollow in the morning, send it through channels that would make it official and traceable. That night, Alara moved her things into Caleb's room as planned. It was awkward at first. She took the far side of the bed, he took the near. They lay there in the dark, both acutely aware of the other's presence. "This is weird," Alara said finally. "Yep. We're married, and this feels like the first time we're actually—" "Yeah." Silence for a moment. Then Alara started laughing, quiet at first, then harder. "What's funny?" Caleb asked. "All of it. The whole ridiculous situation. I'm lying in bed next to a man I barely know, who I'm legally married to, planning to blackmail my father while people try to kill us. It's absurd." Caleb found himself smiling in the dark. "When you put it that way, we're either very brave or very stupid. Can it be both?" That set her off again, and this time Caleb joined in. They lay there laughing like idiots until the absurdity of it all bled away into something that felt almost like peace. "Caleb?" Alara said when they'd quieted down. "Yeah?" "I'm glad it was you. Who answered the door that day?" "I'm glad it was your advertisement," I answered. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Me too," and meant it. They fell asleep like that, not touching, but together. Two people who'd found each other through desperation and stayed through choice. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing everything clean. The response came faster than they expected. Morrison rode back from Red Hollow 3 days later, his face pale and drawn. He didn't even dismount before speaking. "Boss, there's trouble, big trouble." Caleb was mending fence near the barn. He set down his tools, already knowing he wasn't going to like what came next. "What kind?" "The kind with badges." Morrison finally got off his horse. "There's a marshal coming. Says he's got questions about the marriage, about whether it's legitimate." Alara appeared from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "When?" "Tomorrow. Maybe the day after." Morrison looked between them. "Someone's pushing hard, got legal weight behind it." "My father," Alara's voice was flat. "He's not negotiating, he's escalating." Caleb felt the old familiar coldness settle into his chest. The same feeling he'd had before battles, clarity mixed with resignation. Then we're past the point of deals. What do we do? Morrison asked.
We prepare. Caleb looked at Alara. You still have those documents? Hidden, 3 different places. Good. Make it 4, and make sure at least 1 copy is somewhere off the property. He turned to Morrison. You know anyone in Red Hollow we can trust? Really trust? Maybe. Doc Wilson's always been straight with folks. And Martha Chen, who runs the boarding house, she don't like people pushing others around.
Get copies to both of them. Tell them if anything happens to us, those documents go to every newspaper west of the Mississippi. Morrison's eyes widened. You really think it'll come to that? I think we need to be ready in case it does. As Morrison rode off again, Alara came to stand beside Caleb. This is it, isn't it? The moment where everything either works or falls apart. Feels that way. Are you scared? He considered lying, then decided she deserved better. Terrified. You? Same. She looked up at him. But I'm not running. Not this time. Good. Because neither am I. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Caleb checked every gun on the property, made sure ammunition was distributed where they could reach it quickly. Alara went through the documents again, memorizing key details in case the originals disappeared. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was beautiful, all pink and orange and purple, like the sky was on fire. I keep thinking about the locked room, Alara said suddenly. Caleb tensed. Why? Because tomorrow might change everything. And if it does, if things go wrong, I don't want you to have regrets about things you never said or did. She turned to look at him. I don't want either of us to have those regrets. He knew what she was really asking. The room had been locked for 3 years. 3 years of pretending that if he didn't look at it, it didn't exist. Her name was Sarah, he said quietly. We met in town. She was visiting relatives. He stopped, swallowed. I was different then, before the war. Had plans, dreams, thought I could build something that mattered. Alara didn't speak, just waited. We got married quick, too quick probably, but everything felt urgent back then, like time was running out. He stared at the horizon. I went to war, came back broken. She tried to help, tried to put me back together. Got pregnant thinking maybe a child would fix what was wrong with me. That's a lot of pressure, Alara said softly. Too much. Something went wrong with the birth. The baby came too early. Sarah was bleeding and the doctor couldn't stop it, and his voice cracked. I just stood there, useless, watching her die in that room while she screamed, and there was nothing I could do. Caleb, the baby died too. A boy. We'd picked out a name and everything. James, after my father. He rubbed his face roughly. I buried them both on the hill behind the house. Then I locked that room and swore I'd never open it again. Easier to pretend it didn't exist than to remember what I lost there. Alara's hand found his. Her fingers were small and warm and surprisingly strong. I'm sorry for all of it. Not your fault. No, but I'm still sorry. She squeezed his hand. You know it wasn't your fault either, right? What happened to them? Head knows that. Heart's still working on it. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, watching the last of the light fade. My mother killed herself, Alara said eventually. Caleb looked at her sharply. They said it was an accident, a fall down the stairs. But I was 12 and I'd heard them fighting the night before. Heard my father tell her she was worthless except for the connections her family brought. Heard her crying. Alara's voice was steady, but her hand trembled. The next morning, she fell. Or jumped. I'll never know which. That's why you ran. Part of it. I kept thinking, if I stayed, if I let them marry me off to whoever served their interests best, I'd end up like her. Dead inside or just dead. Either way, gone. She looked at him. I chose gone on my own terms instead. I'm glad you did. Are you? Even with everything it's brought? Caleb thought about the past few months. The fear and complications and very real danger, but also the feeling of being alive again, of having something worth protecting beyond just survival. Yeah, he said, I am. They went to bed that night with the weight of tomorrow hanging over them, lay there in the dark, not quite touching but aware of each other in ways that went beyond physical proximity.
Caleb? Alara's voice was quiet. Yeah? If things go badly tomorrow, they won't. But if they do, I want you to know that these months here with you, they've been the first time in my life I've felt like an actual person. Not a possession or a tool or a disappointment, just me. She shifted slightly. So thank you for that. He rolled onto his side to face her, though he could barely make out her shape in the darkness. You gave me the same thing, made me feel like maybe I could be something other than a ghost in my own life. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two broken people pretending to be whole. Maybe we don't have to pretend anymore. Her hand found his in the darkness. They fell asleep like that, fingers intertwined, two people holding on to each other against whatever came next. The marshal arrived just after noon. He was younger than Caleb expected, maybe 30, with the kind of face that hadn't seen enough hardship to make it interesting. Clean suit, clean boots, clean hands that had never done real work. Behind him rode Garrett and two other men, all of them armed. Caleb met them in the yard, Alara at his side. Morrison stood near the barn, rifle held casual but ready. Mr. Vance, the marshal said, I'm Marshal William Peterson. I have some questions regarding your marriage to Eleanor Ashford. Her name is Alara Vance, Caleb said, and I'm happy to answer questions. You have a warrant? Peterson's jaw tightened. This is a preliminary investigation. No warrant necessary. Actually, it is. This is private property. You want to question my wife, you come back with proper paperwork. Mr. Vance, I'm trying to be reasonable. So am I. You show me legal authority to be here, I'll cooperate fully. Otherwise, you're trespassing. Garrett smiled his cold smile. Marshal Peterson is investigating potential fraud, Mr. Vance. It would be in your best interest to cooperate. I'll cooperate with the law, not with whatever this is. Peterson looked uncomfortable. Mr. Ashford has made serious allegations that this marriage was contracted under false pretenses, that his daughter was coerced or mentally unstable when she agreed to it. I'm standing right here, Alara said sharply, and I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Miss Ashford, Mrs. Vance, your father is concerned for your welfare. My father is concerned about losing control. There's a difference. Alara stepped forward. I married Caleb Vance of my own free will. I was not coerced. I was not mentally unstable, and I am not going back to my father's house. Your father has resources, legal resources. He can make this very difficult for you. Let him try, Alara's voice hardened, because I have resources too, documents, evidence, things that would be very embarrassing for my father if they became public. Peterson's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening? I'm stating facts. My father wants to drag this into a legal fight? Fine, but he won't like where it ends up. Garrett had stopped smiling. Careful, Eleanor. Threats can go both ways. So can evidence of corruption and fraud. She met his gaze steadily. Do you really want to test which one carries more weight? The standoff stretched out, tension thick as molasses. Caleb could see Morrison shifting position, getting a better angle. Could feel Alara vibrating with controlled anger beside him. Could see Peterson realizing he'd walked into something more complicated than he'd been told. Marshal, Caleb said quietly, you seem like a decent man, so I'm going to be straight with you. You've been fed a story by people with money and influence. But that doesn't make it true. My wife and I are legally married. We have a legitimate life here. And unless you've got actual evidence of wrongdoing, not just allegations from an angry father, you need to leave. Peterson looked at Garrett, then back at Caleb. Something shifted in his expression. Do you have your marriage certificate? Inside, you want to see it? If you don't mind. Caleb nodded to Alara. She disappeared into the house and came back with the document. Peterson examined it carefully. Looks legitimate, he said finally. That's because it is, Alara said. And you're saying you entered into this marriage willingly? Completely. Under no duress or coercion? None whatsoever. Peterson handed the certificate back. Then I don't see grounds for further investigation. He turned to Garrett. Mr. Ashford's concerns appear to be unfounded. Garrett's face darkened. Marshal, I think you're being hasty. I think I'm doing my job, which is upholding the law, not serving as a private investigator for wealthy families. Peterson mounted his horse.
Mr. and Mrs. Vance, I apologize for the intrusion. Have a good day.
He rode off, leaving Garrett and his men sitting there looking like they'd swallowed something sour. This isn't over, Garrett said. Yeah, it is. Caleb's voice was steel. You tell Mr. Ashford that if he sends anyone else, marshals, lawyers, hired guns, anyone, those documents go public. All of them. To every newspaper, every politician, every business partner he has. We'll burn his reputation to the ground. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Garrett stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he was bluffing. Whatever he saw in Caleb's face must have convinced him, because he finally turned his horse. You're making a mistake, he said. Not the first time. Won't be the last. They rode off, and the tension drained out of the yard like water from a broken barrel. Morrison let out a breath he'd been holding. Well, that could have gone worse. Could have gone better too, Caleb said, but he was smiling slightly. Elara sagged against him, and he caught her automatically. Is it over? She asked. Really over? For now. Your father's smart enough to know when to back off. He steadied her. But we keep those documents hidden, just in case. Just in case, she agreed. They went inside, and Morrison headed back to work, still shaking his head and muttering about crazy bosses who threatened powerful men. Caleb and Elara stood in the kitchen, the adrenaline slowly wearing off, leaving them shaky and exhausted. We did it, Elara said wonderingly. We actually did it. You did it, standing up to him like that. We did it together. She looked at him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Sure you could have. You're stronger than you think. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. They stood there for a moment, just breathing, letting the reality sink in. Then Elara started laughing, half relief, half hysteria. We threatened one of the most powerful men in the country, she said between gasps. With his own corruption, we're either heroes or idiots. Definitely idiots, Caleb said. But he was laughing too. They collapsed into chairs, still laughing, until the laughter turned to tears, relief and fear, and everything they'd been holding back finally breaking free. When they'd both calmed down, Elara wiped her eyes. I need to do something. Something to mark this. To make it real. Like what? She stood up, suddenly purposeful. Come with me. She led him upstairs down the hall to the locked room, stood in front of it, hand on the door. I know this isn't my place, but I think it's time. Caleb's chest tightened. Elara Shah. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years. You don't have to anymore. She looked at him. I'm not saying forget them. I'm saying maybe it's time to remember them differently. Not as a locked door, but as part of who you are. He wanted to argue, wanted to say it was too soon, too hard, too much. But standing there with this woman who'd faced down her own demons and won, he found he couldn't. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. His hand shook as he pulled out the key he kept on a chain around his neck. The lock was stiff from disuse, but it finally turned. The door swung open. The room was exactly as he'd left it 3 years ago. Dust covered everything. The bed where Sarah had died. The cradle he'd built for James. The rocking chair in the corner. It hit him like a punch to the gut, and he had to grab the doorframe to stay upright. Elara's hand found his back, steady and warm. Breathe, she said softly. Just breathe. He did. In and out, in and out. The room didn't disappear, the pain didn't vanish, but it didn't destroy him either. Tell me about her, Elara said. The real her, not the death, the life. Caleb took a shaky breath. She laughed a lot, even when things were hard, had this way of finding joy in small things. A good sunset, fresh bread, the way the light looked on water. He stepped into the room, dust motes swirling in the afternoon sun. She would have liked you, I think. You think? She liked people who spoke their minds, who didn't back down. He picked up a small wooden horse from the dresser, something he'd carved for the baby. She would have told you that you were brave for running, for choosing yourself. Elara moved to the cradle, running her fingers along the carved wood. You made this. Yeah. Before I left for the war. Thought I'd come home to... He stopped, swallowed. Anyway, it's beautiful work. A lot of good it did. No. Elara turned to face him. This room, these things,
They're not monuments to failure. They're proof that you loved, that you tried, that you were willing to build something even knowing it might not last. She gestured around. That takes courage. Didn't feel like courage. Felt like stupidity. Same thing sometimes. He found himself smiling despite the tears on his face. You're something else, you know that? So are you. They stood there in the room that had been locked for so long, and slowly, carefully, Caleb started to talk. About Sarah, about the baby, about his dreams and failures and the weight he'd been carrying. Alara listened, asked questions, helped him sort through memories that had gone sour from being locked away. By the time the sun started setting, they'd opened all the windows, letting fresh air push out the staleness. They'd sorted through Sarah's things, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to let go of. We could turn this into something else, Alara said. Not forget what it was, but let it be something new too. Like what? I don't know yet, but something that honors the past while making room for the future. Caleb looked around the room, still painful, still heavy with loss, but somehow less crushing than before. Yeah, maybe. They closed the door that night, but they didn't lock it, and that felt like progress. The next few weeks passed in unexpected peace. No more visits from Garrett, no more mysterious problems with the ranch. Even the letter from Alara's father, when it finally came, was surprisingly brief. You win. For now. That was all it said. No threats. No promises. Just acknowledgement. He's backing off, Alara said, staring at the letter. Actually backing off. Don't sound so surprised. You gave him no choice. I gave him no good choice. That's different. He could still make this ugly. But he won't. Men like your father, they calculate costs. You made the cost too high. Caleb took the letter from her, tossed it in the fire. It's over. She wanted to believe that. And slowly, as days turned into weeks with no new threats, she started to. Life on the ranch settled into something almost normal. Alara's garden flourished. The cattle prices improved thanks to her business sense. Morrison started courting a girl in town and was insufferable about it. And Caleb and Alara learned how to actually be married. It was awkward at first. They'd skip around each other, overly polite, careful not to intrude. But gradually, they relaxed, started finishing each other's sentences, developed routines and rhythms, learned to read each other's moods and silences. One evening, about 2 months after the confrontation with the marshal, Alara was doing the account books while Caleb repaired a bridle. Comfortable silence between them, the kind that only came from really knowing someone.
I've been thinking, Alara said without looking up. Dangerous. She kicked him lightly under the table. About the future. About what we're building here. What about it? I think we should expand, add more cattle, maybe some horses. There's good grazing land to the north we could purchase. Caleb set down the bridle. That's a big investment.
We can afford it, especially with the money we've saved from my cost-cutting measures. She pulled out a ledger, showed him the numbers. Look, if we expand now, we'll be positioned to take advantage of the new railroad contracts next year. He studied the figures, impressed despite himself. You've really thought this through. I have a lot of time to think while you're out working. She smiled. Someone has to plan for the future. The future, huh? He leaned back. What's that look like to you? Honestly, I'm not sure. A year ago, I thought I'd be married to some business associate of my father's, hosting dinners and producing heirs on schedule. Now, she gestured around. Now I'm doing account books for a ranch and planning cattle purchases, and I'm happier than I've ever been. Even with all the death threats and legal battles? Especially with those, at least they were my death threats and legal battles, not someone else's. Caleb laughed. That's a hell of a way to measure happiness. It works for me. They went back to their tasks, and Caleb found himself thinking about the future too. A year ago, he'd been alone, locked in grief, going through motions. Now he had someone who cared whether he came home for dinner, who argued with him about fencing techniques, who made him laugh despite everything. It wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the life he'd had with Sarah, but it was good, real, worth having. Alara? About the expansion. Let's do it. She looked up, surprised. Really? Really, you're right. We should plan for the future, build something that lasts. Her smile could have lit up the whole territory. We'll need to go to the bank, get a loan, talk to the sellers. Then we'll do that, together. The word hung there. Together. Not just in crisis. Not just because they had to, but because they chose to. Together, Alara agreed softly. That night, lying in bed, Alara spoke into the darkness. Caleb, can I ask you something? Always. Are you happy, really happy, or are you just making the best of a bad situation? He thought about it, wanting to give her an honest answer. I'm not sure I know what happy is anymore. Too much has happened, too much lost. He shifted to face her. But I'm content, and I'm hopeful, and I wake up most mornings glad to be alive. That's more than I had a year ago. Is it enough? Yeah, it's enough. He paused. What about you? I think I'm happy. It's hard to tell. I've spent so much of my life pretending to feel things I didn't that I'm not always sure what's real anymore. She found his hand in the darkness. But this feels real. You feel real. So maybe that's what happy is. Maybe. They lay there, hands linked, and Caleb realized something that should have been obvious weeks ago. He loved her. Not the desperate, consuming love he'd had for Sarah. Something quieter, steadier. Built on respect and partnership and shared struggle. He didn't say it out loud. Wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. Wasn't entirely sure he was ready to say it. But it was there. Growing. Real. And for the first time in years, Caleb Vance felt like maybe the future held something other than just survival. The morning they went to finalize the land purchase, Alara woke up feeling strange. Not sick exactly. Just off. Like her body wasn't quite fitting right in her own skin. She ignored it, got dressed, helped with breakfast. But the feeling persisted. You okay? Caleb asked as they rode toward Red Hollow. Fine, just tired. But she wasn't fine. And as the day wore on, she started to suspect why. She'd missed her monthly bleeding. Twice now, though she'd been too preoccupied with everything else to notice until recently. By the time they finished at the bank and were riding home, she was almost certain. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like cold water. She was carrying Caleb's child. They were going to be parents. Terror and joy warred in her chest. She'd seen what happened to Sarah, knew the risks, knew how badly things could go. But she also knew she wanted this. Wanted to build a family with this man who'd protected her, believed in her, loved her even though he hadn't said the words yet. Alara, you're being real quiet. She looked at Caleb, at this good man who'd been through so much already, who'd lost a wife and child and might be terrified to try again. She should tell him. Right now. Give him time to process. But the words stuck in her throat, and she found herself saying instead, just thinking about the ranch, the expansion, everything. It's a lot. Yeah. She'd tell him soon when she was certain, when she had the right words, just not today. That night, alone in the bathroom while Caleb was checking the animals, Alara pressed her hand to her still flat stomach and whispered a promise. I'm going to keep you safe, no matter what. Your father and I were going to give you something neither of us had, a real home, real choice, real love. It felt like a vow, scared and hopeful and true. And for better or worse, the future was coming whether they were ready or not. Alara kept the secret for 2 weeks, not because she wanted to, but because every time she tried to tell Caleb, she'd see the shadow that crossed his face when anyone mentioned children. She'd remember the locked room, the tiny cradle he'd built with his own hands for a son who never got to use it. The words would die in her throat, and she'd find herself talking about cattle or weather or anything else instead. But secrets had weight, and this one was getting heavier by the day. She was in the garden one morning feeling nauseous and trying to pretend she wasn't, when Morrison came riding up fast from town. Mrs. Vance, he called, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. Where's the boss? North pasture. Why? What's wrong? Letter came from that Martha woman. He handed her the envelope already opened. I read it, figured it was urgent enough. Alara's hands shook as she pulled out the single sheet of paper. Alara, your father is ill. Very ill. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. He's asking for you.
I know what he put you through, but he's dying and he wants to make peace. At least, that's what he says. I don't trust him. Even dying Ashford men don't change, but I thought you should know. Martha Alara read it twice, feeling nothing at first. Then everything at once. Anger, grief, a terrible, complicated relief. You gonna go? Morrison asked quietly. I don't know. She was still standing there, staring at the letter when Caleb rode up. He took one look at her face and dismounted. What happened? She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked at her. What do you want to do? I don't know, she said again. He's dying. My father is dying, and I don't know what I feel about it. That's fair. He wasn't exactly father of the year. No. She laughed, bitter and sharp. But he's still my father. The only parent I have left. And if I don't go, if I let him die without… She stopped, frustrated. I don't even know what I want from him. Apology? Understanding? Closure? Caleb put his hands on her shoulders, grounding her. Then maybe you go and figure it out, see what he has to say. Decide if it matters. You think I should go? I think you should do whatever lets you sleep at night when this is over. He paused. But you're not going alone. Caleb, not negotiable. You want to see your father, we both go. I'm not letting you walk back into that world without someone watching your back. Morrison cleared his throat. I'll hold down the ranch. You two take as long as you need. Alara looked between them. These men who'd become her family in ways that blood never had. Thank you, she said, meaning it for more than just this moment. They left the next morning. The journey to her father's estate took 3 days by train and coach. 3 days of Alara getting progressively more tense and Caleb watching her with increasing concern. You need to eat, he said on the second day, pushing a plate toward her at a station diner. I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday. That's not sustainable. I said I'm not hungry. Her sharp tone made him back off, but she saw the worry in his eyes. The secret pressed against her ribs like a fist. She should tell him, especially now, before they walked into her father's house, where everything was complicated and dangerous. But the words still wouldn't come. The Ashford estate appeared on the third day, massive and imposing, exactly as she remembered. Manicured lawns, pristine stonework, windows that gleamed like they'd never seen dust. It looked like a prison dressed up as paradise. Caleb whistled low. That's where you grew up? Unfortunately. No wonder you ran. A servant met them at the door, not someone Alara recognized. Young, nervous, clearly warned about the prodigal daughter's return. Mrs. Vance? The girl said, stumbling over the name. Mr. Ashford is upstairs. He's been expecting you. I bet he has. They climbed the grand staircase past portraits of Ashford ancestors who all had the same cold eyes and calculating expressions. Alara's hand found Caleb's, needing the anchor. Her father's bedroom was on the third floor. Martha was waiting outside, older and grayer than Alara remembered, but with the same kind eyes. Child, she said, pulling Alara into a fierce hug. You look well. So do you. Alara pulled back. How is he really? Dying, but slowly. He's got time yet. Martha glanced at Caleb. This the husband? Caleb Vance, ma'am. He tipped his hat. He treating you right? Better than right. Good. Because if he wasn't, I know people. Martha's smile was sharp. Then she sobered. He's weak, but he's still himself. Don't let your guard down. I won't. Martha opened the door, and Alara stepped into her father's sick room. Richard Ashford looked nothing like the powerful man who'd controlled her life for so many years. He was thin, gray, diminished. Tubes and medicines cluttered the bedside table. But his eyes, those were still sharp as ever when they focused on her. Eleanor, his voice was a rasp. You came. It's Alara now. She stayed near the door, Caleb a solid presence beside her. Martha said you wanted to see me. I wanted to see my daughter before I die. Is that so wrong? Depends on why. A ghost of his old smile crossed his face. Still sharp. Good. I worried that rancher might have dulled you. That rancher is my husband, and he's standing right here. Richard's gaze shifted to Caleb, assessing. So you're the man who stole my daughter. Didn't steal anyone, Caleb said evenly. She chose to leave. After you poisoned her against me. I didn't have to. You did that yourself. Ilara expected her father to explode. Instead, he laughed, wet and painful. Perhaps. I was never what you'd call a good father, was I, Eleanor? No, you weren't. Too busy building an empire, making sure the Ashford name meant something. He coughed, harsh and rattling. Didn't leave much time for actually caring about the people who carried that name. Is that supposed to be an apology? Would you believe it if it was? Ilara thought about it. No.
Smart girl. I taught you that at least.
He shifted in bed, wincing. I didn't ask you here to apologize. I'm not that far gone yet. Then why did you ask me here? To make you an offer. And there it was. Even dying, her father was still trying to control her. I don't want anything from you, Ilara said. You haven't heard the offer yet. Don't need to. Whatever it is, the answer is no.
Not even if it secures your future? Your husband's ranch? Your children's inheritance?
He watched her face carefully. Yes, I know about the pregnancy. I have people everywhere, Eleanor, even in dusty frontier towns. Ilara's blood went cold. Beside her, Caleb went rigid. You're bluffing, she said, but her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach.
Richard smiled. You started showing signs 6 weeks ago. Morning sickness, exhaustion. You've been careful, but not careful enough. His eyes moved to Caleb. Did you know, Mr. Vance? Or has my daughter been keeping secrets? Caleb's voice was deadly quiet. We're leaving. Wait. Richard raised a skeletal hand. Just hear me out. Then you can leave with my blessing or my curse. Your choice. Ilara wanted to walk out, should have walked out, but something made her stay. 1 minute, then we're done. Fair enough. Her father took a labored breath. I'm dying. The doctors give me a month at most. When I die, the empire I built will be divided among vultures who'll tear it apart within a year. Unless what? Unless I have an heir who can hold it together, someone smart, ruthless, capable. He looked at her. Someone like you. No. I'm offering you everything, Eleanor. The business, the money, the power, all of it. You come back, take over, and when I die, it's all yours. I said no. Think about what you're turning down. Security, wealth, a future where your child wants for nothing. My child won't want for anything. We'll make sure of that. On a ranch in the middle of nowhere. With what money? What prospects? Richard's voice turned sharp. You're pregnant, Eleanor. Do you know what that means? The risks, the costs if something goes wrong? Don't. Caleb's voice cut like a knife. Don't you dare use that against her. I'm being practical. Medical care costs money. The best doctors cost more. If there are complications, there won't be, Ilara said, but her voice shook. You can't know that. Your mother died giving birth to you. Did you know that? Well, not immediately, but the birth damaged her, made her weak, contributed to her accident. He let that sink in. These things run in families, Eleanor. Take the offer. Ensure your child's safety. Ilara felt like she couldn't breathe. She'd known her mother had trouble with childbirth, but not that it had weakened her. Not that it might have been part of why she'd... That's enough. Caleb stepped forward. You're a dying man trying to manipulate your daughter one last time. It's pathetic. It's practical. Something you'd understand if you weren't blinded by whatever sentiment you've developed for her. I love her. That's not sentiment. That's fact. The room went quiet. Ilara stared at Caleb, who looked as surprised as she felt by his own words. Richard laughed again, painfully. Love. How quaint. And what will love do when the birth goes wrong? When you're standing there watching her die like you watched your first wife die? Will love pay for doctors? Will love keep her safe? Get out, a new voice said from the doorway. Martha stood there, face flushed with anger. Mr. Ashford, you're upsetting yourself, and your guests, they need to leave. They'll leave when I say, they'll leave now, doctor's orders. Martha moved into the room, physically positioning herself between Richard and Ilara. You've said your piece. Time to let them go. Richard started to argue, then dissolved into coughing. When he finally caught his breath, he looked at Ilara with something that might have been genuine emotion. The offer stands, he said. Think about it. You have until I die to decide. I've already decided. Then you're a fool, just like your mother. Martha ushered them out before Alara could respond. She led them down the hall to a sitting room, closed the door, and turned to them with fierce intensity. Don't listen to him, she said. He's cruel even when he's dying, especially when he's dying. He knows I'm pregnant, Alara said numbly. How does he know? He has people watching, always has. Martha took her hands. But child, you can't let him scare you. Women have babies every day. You're strong. You'll be fine. My mother wasn't fine. Your mother had other problems, depression, a husband who drove her to despair. That's what killed her, not childbirth. Martha squeezed her hands. You're not her. You have a man who actually loves you, who'll fight for you. That makes all the difference. Alara looked at Caleb, who'd been silent since his declaration. You meant that? What you said? Yeah, I meant it. Why didn't you tell me before?
Didn't know how. Wasn't sure you wanted to hear it. He moved closer. But standing in that room, listening to him try to manipulate you, I realized I couldn't let you face that without knowing. You're not alone. You've never been alone. Not since the day you stepped off that stagecoach. Alara's eyes filled with tears, relief and fear and love all mixed together. I'm scared. I know. About the baby, about what could go wrong. I know. But I want this. I want our child. I want our life. Then that's what we'll have. He pulled her close, and she let herself lean into him. We'll get the best doctor we can afford. We'll be careful, and we'll face whatever comes together, just like we've faced everything else. Martha watched them with approval. You picked a good one, child. I know. Alara pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. We should go. I don't want to stay here any longer than necessary. Wait. Martha went to a desk, pulled out an envelope. Before you go, this is for you. Inside were documents, legal papers transferring ownership of a substantial sum of money and property to Alara Quinn Vance. What is this? Alara asked. Your mother's inheritance, the money her family left her. Your father's been controlling it all these years, but legally it's yours. Always has been. Martha smiled grimly. I've been working with lawyers quietly for months, getting everything in order. When your father dies, he can't touch this. It's protected. Yours absolutely. Alara stared at the papers. It was more money than she'd imagined. Enough to secure the ranch, expand it, ensure their child's future. Everything her father had offered, but without the strings. Martha, I can't. You can. You will. It's your birthright, what your mother wanted you to have. Martha's eyes were fierce. Use it. Build something good, something that would have made her proud. Thank you, Alara hugged her tightly, for everything, for protecting this, for protecting me. That's what family does, child, real family. They left the estate as the sun was setting, and Alara didn't look back, not even once. On the train home, Caleb finally brought it up. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. Alara set down the book she'd been pretending to read. Yes. How long have you known? A few weeks. I was going to tell you, but you were scared, terrified. She met his eyes. Of how you'd react, of what it would bring up for you, of everything. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm scared too. I know. When Sarah died, when I lost them both, I swore I'd never put myself through that again. Never risk that kind of pain. And now? Now I'm risking it anyway. Because the alternative, living without you, without this, that's worse. He took her hand. I can't promise everything will be fine. Can't promise nothing will go wrong. But I can promise I'll be there. Every step, every moment. That's all I need. Is it? Because your father was right about one thing. Medical care costs money. Good doctors cost more. If there are complications, then we use my mother's inheritance. That's what it's for. Securing our future, our child's future. She squeezed his hand. We have options now, Caleb. We're not helpless. He nodded slowly. When are you due? Late spring, April or May, the doctor in Red Hollow thinks. That gives us time to prepare, to get ready. Are you happy? Alara asked. About the baby? Really happy? Caleb thought about it, being honest with himself and her. I'm scared out of my mind, but Yeah, I'm happy. We're building something here. A life, a family, something that's ours. He smiled, tentative. A kid to pass it all down to. That's good. Alara felt something unlock in her chest. Yeah, it is. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, watching the landscape roll by. Then Caleb spoke again. We should get married, really married. We are married. I mean married, in front of people with vows that mean something beyond legal protection. He turned to face her. I want to marry you because I love you, not because we're running from something or protecting each other, just because. Just because? Just because you're you, and I choose you every day. I want to say that out loud. Alara's eyes filled with tears again, happy ones this time. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah?
Yeah. They kissed there on the train, and if the other passengers stared, neither of them cared. When they got back to Red Hollow, the whole town somehow already knew about the baby. Morrison, Caleb said when they saw the banner hung across Main Street. Congratulations, Vance family. Has to be, Alara agreed. The kid met them at the ranch, grinning like an idiot. Welcome back. How'd it go? Fine. My father's dying. We're rich, and apparently everyone knows I'm pregnant. Morrison had the grace to look embarrassed. I might have mentioned it to one person who might have told everyone else. Morrison, but look, he gestured to the house. While you were gone, folks came by, brought baby things. Mrs. Henderson knitted a blanket. Doc Wilson left medical books. Even the pastor, I know you're not religious, boss, but he meant well. He left a Bible with verses marked for protection. Alara looked at the pile of gifts on the porch, her throat tight. They did this for us. You're one of them now, both of you. That's what community does. It was true. They'd stopped being outsiders somewhere along the way, had become part of Red Hollow without even noticing. We're getting married again, Caleb announced. Real ceremony this time, and you're all invited. Morrison's grin got impossibly wider. Can I be best man? Who else would it be? They planned the wedding for a month out, giving Alara's father time to die if he was going to. Morbid, but practical. The news came 3 weeks later. Richard Ashford had passed in his sleep. No pain, no drama, just gone. Alara cried, which surprised her. Not because she missed him, she didn't, not really, but because it was the end of something. The final severing of ties to a life she'd never wanted but had been born into. You okay? Caleb asked, holding her while she wept. I don't know. I hated him, but he was still my father. You're allowed to have complicated feelings about complicated people. I keep thinking about what he said, about the offer, what life could have been if I'd taken it. Do you regret not taking it? No, but I wonder sometimes. She pulled back to look at him. Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if you'd never placed that advertisement, if I'd never answered it? Sometimes. Then I remember I'd still be locked in that house with my ghosts, going through motions, half alive at best. He touched her face gently. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Maybe more. We saved each other. Yeah, we did. The funeral was held in the city. Alara didn't attend. Sent a telegram instead. Regrets. Unable to attend. Alara Vance. Let them chew on that. On her married name, on her absence, on the fact that the Ashford Empire would have to survive without her. The wedding happened on a crisp autumn day, with leaves turning gold and the air smelling of wood smoke and possibility. Half of Red Hollow showed up. They'd set up chairs in the ranch yard, decorated everything with wildflowers and hope. Doc Wilson officiated since there was no judge available, and the pastor had already blessed them without permission. Alara wore a simple dress, cream-colored, loose enough to accommodate her growing belly. Caleb wore his best suit, the one he'd gotten married in the first time, but it felt different now. Morrison stood next to him, trying not to cry. Mrs. Henderson dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Martha had come all the way from the city, proud and fierce in the front row. When it came time for the vows, Caleb spoke first. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning that isn't just duty. He took her hands. I love you. Not because you need protecting or because it's convenient. I love you because you're brave and smart And you don't take anyone's nonsense, including mine, because you make me want to be better. Because when I look at the future now, I see you in it, and that makes everything worthwhile. Alara's turn. She'd written something, but looking at Caleb, the words she'd prepared vanished. I spent my whole life being told who I should be, what I should want, how I should live. You're the first person who ever asked me what I actually wanted, who saw me as a person instead of a piece in someone else's game. Her voice shook. I love you because you're kind without being weak, because you protect without controlling, because you gave me a choice and then stood by whatever I chose. That's everything. They exchanged rings, simple bands they'd bought together in Red Hollow. Doc Wilson pronounced them husband and wife. Again. For real this time. When they kissed, the crowd erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted into the night. Someone brought out a fiddle. Morrison danced with his girl. Mrs. Henderson made sure everyone had enough to eat. Martha told embarrassing stories about Alara's childhood. It was messy and loud and perfect. Later, when most of the guests had left and they were cleaning up by lantern light, Caleb found Alara standing by the fence, looking out at the land. Tired? He asked. Exhausted, but happy. She leaned into him when he came up behind her. This is what I wanted. This exact thing. Family, home, people who care without needing something from me. You've got it. All of it. So do you. They stood there watching the stars come out, the ranch quiet around them. Somewhere in the house, Morrison was probably making coffee. The cattle were settled for the night. Everything was peaceful. Caleb? Yeah? I'm still scared. About the birth. About being a mother. About everything. That's okay. Scared doesn't mean you can't do it. My father said, your father was wrong about a lot of things, including you. He turned her to face him. You're not your mother. You're not Sarah. You're Alara Vance, and you're the strongest person I know. You'll get through this because you always get through things. We'll get through it. Right. We'll get through it. The months passed faster than either of them expected. Winter came hard, but they were prepared. The ranch thrived with the expansion. Cattle prices held steady. Alara managed the business side with the same fierce intelligence she brought to everything. And she grew. Slowly at first, then dramatically. By midwinter, there was no hiding the pregnancy. Doc Wilson checked on her regularly. Everything looked normal, he said. Healthy. But he was also honest about the risks. Things can change fast, he told them. If she goes into labor, get me immediately. Don't wait. Don't try to handle it yourself. Caleb made Morrison memorize the fastest route to Doc Wilson's house. Made sure they always had a horse saddled and ready. Prepared for every contingency he could think of. Alara watched him work himself into knots and finally called him on it. You can't control everything. I can try. Caleb. She made him sit down, took his hands. I know you're scared. I know what happened with Sarah haunts you, but this isn't then. I'm not her, and you've done everything you can to prepare. What if it's not enough? Then we deal with it together, but you can't live in fear of what might happen. That's not living at all. He knew she was right, didn't make it easier. Spring arrived with sudden warmth and new life everywhere. The cattle had calves. Alara's garden started sprouting, and her due date approached like a freight train. She went into labor on a warm April morning. Caleb was in the barn when Morrison came running. Boss, it's time! Everything after that was a blur. Getting Alara comfortable. Morrison writing for Doc Wilson. Waiting. Labor was long. 18 hours of pain and fear, and Alara gripping his hand hard enough to leave bruises. Doc Wilson stayed calm, but Caleb could see him monitoring everything carefully, checking for warning signs, ready to intervene. And through it all, Alara was incredible, exhausted and in pain and scared, but fighting, refusing to give up. I can see the head, Doc Wilson said finally. One more push. Come on, Alara. You can do this. She pushed, screamed, pushed again. And then, a baby's cry, clear and strong and unmistakably alive. It's a girl, Doc Wilson announced, holding up the tiny red-faced creature. Healthy and mad as hell. Caleb couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at this impossible small person who was somehow his daughter. Doc Wilson cleaned her up, checked her over, then placed her in Alara's arms.
"Hello, sweetheart," Alara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello. We've been waiting for you."
Caleb moved closer, looking down at his wife and daughter. They were both alive, both healthy, both here. The relief was so intense it hurt. "She's perfect," he managed. "She is." Alara looked up at him. "We did it. You did it. I just held your hand and tried not to pass out. That's what I needed, you being here, present, not running from it." Doc Wilson finished cleaning up, gave them instructions for aftercare, and left them alone with their daughter. Morrison peeked in later, grinning. "Can I see her?" "Come in," Alara said. The kid approached like he was approaching a wild animal, all cautious reverence. When he got close enough to see the baby's face, his eyes went wide. "She's so small." "Most babies are," Caleb said dryly. "What's her name?" Caleb looked at Alara. They'd discussed this, argued about it, finally agreed. "Hope," Alara said. "Hope Sarah Vance." Morrison's eyes got suspiciously bright. That's real good, Mrs. Vance." After he left, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, watching his daughter sleep in Alara's arms. "Hope Sarah," he said quietly. "You sure?" "I'm sure. Hope for the future we're building. Sarah for the past you've carried. Both matter. Both deserve to be remembered." He thought about the locked room, now transformed into a nursery, about the cradle he'd built for James, refinished and ready for hope, about how grief and joy could exist in the same space without canceling each other out. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not giving up. On yourself. On us. On this." He gestured to encompass everything, the ranch, their daughter, the life they'd built together. "Same to you." Alara shifted Hope carefully. "Hold her! She should know her father." Caleb took his daughter, terrified he'd break her, but she was sturdier than she looked. She fit in his arms like she belonged there. Hope opened her eyes, dark like her mother's, and looked at him with the unfocused intensity of newborns.
"Hey there," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm going to mess this up sometimes. Probably a lot. But I promise I'll try my best. Promise I'll love you no matter what. Promise I'll give you the freedom to choose your own life, even if I don't always like your choices." The baby made a small noise, then went back to sleep. Alara watched them with a soft expression. "You're going to be a good father." "How do you know?" "Because you're already worried about doing it wrong. That's how I know." The first few weeks were chaos. Sleepless nights, constant feeding, learning what each different cry meant. Morrison helped where he could, but mostly it was Caleb and Alara figuring it out together. They made mistakes, lots of them, but Hope thrived anyway, growing stronger and more alert each day. One night, when Hope was about 3 weeks old, Caleb found Alara sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery, feeding their daughter. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Don't want to. I keep thinking about how close I came to missing this. If I'd stayed in that life, if I'd never found the courage to run." She looked down at Hope. "I would have been married to someone my father chose, producing heirs on a schedule, never knowing what it felt like to actually want your own child. But you did run, and you're here." "We're here." She looked up at him. "All three of us. Against all odds." Caleb sat on the floor next to the chair, watching his wife and daughter in the lamplight. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we're going to be okay. Actually okay. Not just surviving, but living. Because of Hope? Because of all of it. The ranch, the town, each other. We built something real here. Something that matters." Laura reached out with her free hand, and he took it. They sat like that, connected, complete, while their daughter dozed between heartbeats. Outside, the ranch was quiet. The cattle were settled. The stars were out. The wind carried the smell of growing things and distant rain. It wasn't perfect. There would be hard days ahead, challenges they couldn't predict, struggles and setbacks, and all the normal chaos of living. But they'd face it together, as partners, as lovers, as parents, as a family. Word reached them 6 months later that the Ashford business empire had collapsed. Without Richard's iron control and with no clear heir, the various factions had torn it apart, fighting over scraps. The family name that had once meant power and wealth
now meant scandal and bankruptcy. Alara felt nothing when she heard that life was so far removed from hers now that it might as well have happened to someone else. You ever regret it? Caleb asked. Giving up all that potential power? She looked around the ranch house, at Hope sleeping in her cradle, at the account book showing steady if modest profit, at the life they'd built from nothing but determination and choice. Not even once. Good. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set. It was their favorite time of day, after the work was done but before night fell, the quiet moment between. "I've been thinking," Alara said. "Dangerous." She kicked him lightly, about expanding again, maybe adding a few more hands. Morrison can't do everything himself forever. You want to grow the operation. I want to build something that lasts, something we can pass down to Hope, to her children if she has them. A legacy that's actually worth having. Caleb thought about his own father, who'd left him nothing but a plot in a cemetery and a tendency towards silence. About Sarah's family, who disowned her for marrying beneath her station. About Richard Ashford's empire, built on exploitation and destroyed by greed. "Yeah," he said. "Let's do that. Build something worth keeping." They worked on it together over the next years, expanding carefully, sustainably, hiring people who needed second chances, the way they'd both gotten second chances, building a community as much as a business. Hope grew. Learned to walk at 10 months, talk at a year, argue at 2. She was fierce and stubborn and curious about everything. "She's just like you," Caleb told Alara one day, after Hope had demanded to know why the sky was blue and refused to accept "because it is" as an answer. "No, she's like us. Best parts of both." Maybe. Or maybe Hope was entirely herself, shaped by them, but not defined by them. That's what they wanted, for her to have the freedom to become whoever she was meant to be. On Hope's 3rd birthday, they threw a party. Half of Red Hollow showed up, just like at the wedding. Morrison was there with his wife and their new baby. Mrs. Henderson brought cake. Doc Wilson brought a medical book with pictures because Hope had declared she wanted to be a doctor, or a rancher, or maybe both. "That's allowed, right?" she asked her parents seriously. "Anything's allowed," Alara told her. "Long as you work hard and treat people right." "Okay, then I'll be both." As the party wound down and guests started leaving, Caleb found himself standing in the yard, looking at everything they'd built. The expanded ranch, the new barn, the house that was actually a home now, full of life and noise and love. Alara came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm glad you answered my advertisement. Glad you stepped off that stagecoach. Glad you were brave enough to choose this life over the easy one." "It hasn't exactly been easy." "No, but it's been ours. That's what matters." They stood there watching Hope chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, her laughter bright and clear. "We did good," Alara said quietly. "Yeah, we did." And standing there in the wind-beaten frontier they'd claimed as home, with their daughter's joy ringing out and the future stretching before them full of possibility, Caleb Vance realized something important. He'd stopped bracing for loss. Somewhere along the way, between the locked room and the new life, between running from the past and building toward the future, he'd learned to live again. Actually live. Not just survive or endure, but embrace each day as it came. Alara had taught him that. Or maybe they'd taught each other. Either way, it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The wind picked up, carrying Hope's laughter across the ranch. Alara leaned into Caleb, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that until the stars came out, 2 people who'd found each other through desperation and stayed through choice, watching their daughter dance with fireflies and dreaming of all the tomorrows still to come. Life hadn't turned out the way either of them planned. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the best things in life weren't planned at all. They were chosen, fought for, built piece by careful piece, and in the end, that made them all the more precious.